Well, hello everyone. I wanted to leave you with the lecture on seaweed since I'm going to be gone for a couple days, and I didn't want you guys to, for you to lose any time. So I did want to go ahead and start on some seaweed information because this is going to be really cool for when we go down to Monterey this weekend, and I want you to be able to look out for this stuff. So we're going to talk about seaweed, and seaweeds are also called macrophytes or macroalgae. They are all multicellular. So any of the unicellular green and red algae are not considered seaweed. Let's take a look at their general structure. Okay, and this is what you're going to look for when we dive. And maybe even if we find some up on shore, we're going to kind of take a look at it for these features. So seaweed lacks true leaves, true stems, and roots. So all of that stuff in your head about plants and land plants, these are different. They are just different. So the complete body is called the thallus, whether it is the blades or whatever, it's called the thallus. There are portions of the thallus that are flattened and broad, and they look like leaves. And those are just called blades, but they're not true leaves. And the way you can tell is if you look at them, they don't have veins in them, like whenever you look at leaves that we find on the ground on land. Also, the upper and the lower side of the blade are identical. So, as you know from land plants, if you remember, the underside has the stomata, and the stomata opens up and allows for gas exchange. That's not the way these are. So, they're called blades, they're not called leaves. They have at the base of them, and you're going to see that over here. If you look down here, you'll see it right down at the base of the blade. You'll see these little round gas things, and ththose are called nematocysts. And those nematocysts are filled with a gas that help keep the blades close to the surface. They need, of course, to be close to the surface to do photosynthesis. So those nematocytes help buoy those up. The stem-like structure that the blades are attached to is called the stipe. And then the root-like structure, which when you dive, I really hope you get down to the bottom and you can see the bottom of some of the large giant kelp we have here in Monterey. You'll see something called a holdfast. And what it looks like is it looks like a whole bunch of like roots. It's almost like you pulled the plant out of the water and you see all these fibrous roots, and they're all holding on to something, often rocks or kind of mounds of rooty like stuff. And those are called holdfasts. I really hope you get to see these when we're down there. So all of them, all seaweeds are photosynthetic. Okay, so they have pigment which absorbs light, and with that they produce, as you can see here, they produce sugars, C6H12O6, and they produce oxygen. Now that oxygen, of course, is released. It helps the waters to have oxygen in it for other animals and plants. And it also produces those sugars, which goes into, of course, the seaweed, and which are then consumed by organisms. So in this kelp, what you're going to see is when you dive, you're going to see other organisms around it. Some might be nibbling on it, some might be hiding in it. This is just an image again of the chloroplasts. You probably remember these, that everything is in the thylakoids. And in the thylakoids is where, of course, that photosynthesis takes place. Now, there are three kinds of seaweed, and you don't always find all of them in the same place. As a matter of fact, the green algae is mainly found in freshwater, but you will see it in some estuaries, bays, and even some tide pools that do have a higher salinity count. So it's thought that land plants evolved from this green algae. They are very simple and they have a really, really bright thallus. They're very, very green. Okay, those are the major chlorophylls in them, and they're very green. You also have the red algae, and the red algae, you're going to see it. We'll see. I'll show you a couple pictures of it. It has red pigments in it that are so strong that they actually appear red, and it masks the other colors. There's about 4,000 species of red algae. They're almost all mainly marine. Okay, so this is like the largest group of all the algae. These guys have a large economic importance. This is where a lot of food comes from, is this red algae. Let's take a look at them in depth a little more. Oh, the brown algae. So the brown algae, that's what we mainly are going to see when we are in Monterey. And you're going to see those, the big old bull kelp and the giant kelp. Those are all in Monterey. Lots and lots of brown ones. And the brown ones have a lot of this yellow, green, yellow brownish color, chlorophyll, and that's what gives it the color. The brown algae are anywhere from a color of kind of an olive green to a brown, and you're going to see that with the kelp that you see on this weekend. So red algae, let's take a look at it. There's two different kinds here. There's the encrusting form and the articulated form. The encrusting form you're definitely probably going to see, but you see it a lot in warmer waters. And these are kind of the reef builders. So this kind of algae can produce deposits of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, and that forms this hard crust. And it looks like it's almost like red stone on top of rocks and things, but it's actually an algae. Um, the articulated kind, you'll see they don't get huge, they don't get massively large, the kind that normally we'll see, but they're articulated. So you'll see here in the picture that they look like they have little fingers on them. Okay, and that's an articulated form of red algae, and you may see that. Green algae, again, mainly in freshwater, but you will see it in some salty areas. So they're very, very green, and they are the ancestors of our modern plants. So the general life histories of them. So first off, they need a watery environment to reproduce. They've got to be in water. Okay, they're not going to reproduce if they're dry. So that is a huge adaptation that had to take place before that green algae moved onto land, right? Because on land, they're going to have times where they're out of the water. So they had to adapt to be able to reproduce out of the water, and that's where the flowering came about. So there's asexual reproduction, and that's when there's budding from the thallus. So on the thallus, a bit of it comes off, and from that, a new plant grows. That's asexual. Giant kelp does that. Then there's sexual reproduction, and the sexual reproduction has this alternating generations of producing gametophytes and sporophytes. And it adds this genetic variation to them as they continue to grow and to multiply. There's a massive economic importance of kelp. And I know you probably think about it in terms of like, okay, if you've ever had sushi, you know that there's kelp on there. You might have even eaten like kelp chips. And so that's one area. But what you don't know is that also red algae is really used a lot as a thickener, and it's used as an emulsifier. And what that means is, as an emulsifier, it's something like mayonnaise. You know how mayonnaise is very blended up? But mayonnaise actually, if it didn't have this algae in there, it would actually separate. The oil would separate from the egg stuff. So the emulsifier helps keep that together. It also is in things like ice cream and gum, some very, very common things that you use. We use this algae in. It's also, of course, it's used in aquaculture. It's used for plants that we are, or for animals that we are growing in captivity. We're using it for food sources for them, and also for biofuels. So I'd like you to stop, because this is the last slide, and I'd like you to take a minute now and go ahead and click on this YouTube. This YouTube is a few minutes long, but I really want you to watch it because it shows you, even though it takes place in the Channel Islands, which is warmer water. Channel Islands are off the coast of Santa Barbara. So those waters are warmer than up here. It's a great place to dive all around Catalina Island and there. And you can take dive boats out and do some beautiful dives out at the channels. But this video really shows you a bunch of different kinds of kelp. And you're going to see the large bull kelp that we'll see when we dive. You're going to see, I want you to look for the thallus. I want you to look for the blades. I want you to look for the nematocysts, and I want you to see, and the stipe, and I want you to take a look at those and see how, like, the nematocysts help keep the blades to the surface, and how there's many more blades towards the top than at the bottom. And maybe you'll even see some holdfasts in there. This is why when you dive in Monterey or even in the channels, it's like diving in a rainforest. Up at the top, it's very, very thick with all these blades, but when you dive down, it's like swimming through a bunch of tree trunks. It's so cool. Look also, you're going to see red algae as well, different kinds of red algae in this. And then you'll see a whole bunch of other very cool animals. And you might see that interplay with the animals and how they interact with the algae, whether they're eating it or they're hiding in it. They're using it as a place to sleep, where they're camouflaged so that they can hang out for a while. So just kind of look at that in this video. And then you're going to be working on an activity. All right, enjoy it, and I will be seeing you in Monterey.